Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to take a little trip.
Mm.
I want you to imagine it is the middle of the night, say 2:40 a.m. The year is 1811. We are standing on a cobblestone street in Nottingham, England.
And the air, it's not fresh, it's thick.
Yeah, it tastes like soot. It's filled with that acrid smoke from the coal fires that have been burning all day in the city's factories.
And it's quiet, but it's not a peaceful quiet. You can feel a tension in the air. If you listen really closely, past the wind, you can hear this sound.
A rhythmic thud.
Yeah, thud, thud, thud. Heavy boots on the cobblestones. A lot of them.
Right. And we're watching a group of men moving through the shadows. Their faces are blackened with coal dust, so their own mothers wouldn't recognize them.
And these guys, they aren't thieves. Not in the usual sense. They aren't there to steal cloth or a few coins.
No, they're on a mission. And in their hands, they aren't carrying lockpicks. They're carrying these massive sledgehammers.
Yeah.
Great big iron hammers they call Enochs.
And they are heading straight for a textile factory. When they get there, they don't bother knocking.
No. They just crash right through the heavy wooden doors. Imagine the sound of that wood splintering, men shouting, and then this deafening clang of metal striking metal.
They find what they're looking for, the wide frames, these new massive weaving machines.
And they absolutely destroy them. They smash them into nothing but scrap metal.
See, this isn't just random vandalism. It's a targeted strike. These are desperate men. They are watching these machines steal their livelihoods, their status, and their ability to feed their families.
It is a terrifying scene. But before we just write these guys off as, criminals, I want to ask you, the student listening right now, a question. I want to put you right in their boots.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you've spent the last 10 years mastering a skill. Maybe it's coding in Python, or you've perfected graphic design, or maybe you've spent years learning how to write complex essays. You're good at it. You are respected for it.
You've put in the time. Your 10,000 hours. You're the expert.
Exactly. And then tomorrow morning, a new box arrives in your classroom or your workplace. It's a machine. And this machine, it can do exactly what you do.
But it does it faster.
And cheaper.
And it doesn't need to sleep or get paid.
And suddenly, all that expertise you built up, it's worthless. You're not an expert anymore. You're obsolete.
Your entire future just evaporated.
What would you do? Would you just shake hands with the boss and say, well, I guess that's progress for you? Or would you be angry?
I mean, would you want to take a sledgehammer to that machine?
That is the fundamental human question we are dealing with in this deep dive.
It really is.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm your host, and joined by my colleague, we are putting on our history teacher hats today to guide you through this.
That's right. Today we're exploring two very specific groups from 19th century Britain who, well, they decided they weren't just going to roll over and accept the harsh changes of the Industrial Revolution. We're talking about the Luddites and the Chartists.
And our mission for this session is pretty straightforward. We want to understand how regular people, people like you and me, react when their entire world is turned upside down by technology and, frankly, unfair politics.
And look, we aren't here to tell you who was right or who was wrong.
No, absolutely not.
We aren't taking sides. Our job is to look at the evidence, analyze what happened, and really try to understand the why behind their actions. Because, as we're going to see, history has this very strange habit of mirroring the present.
It really, really does. So let's unpack this. We're going to start with that first group, the one smashing those machines back in 1811, the Luddites.
Okay.
Now, be honest. When you hear that word Luddite today, what comes to mind?
Well, in modern conversation, it's almost always used as an insult, right?
Yeah.
If your dad can't figure out how to use Bluetooth on his phone, or if someone refuses to get a TikTok account, you call them a Luddite. It's just shorthand for someone who is afraid of technology.
Or someone who's backward or just, stupid. Oh, don't be such a Luddite. Just update your phone.
Exactly. But here is where the history just completely flips the script on us. Based on the actual historical record, that definition is, well, it's dead wrong.
A total misconception.
It is. If we actually look at who these men were, they weren't uneducated laborers who were confused by a bunch of gears and levers. The Luddites were primarily croppers and weavers.
Okay, let's drill down on that. What exactly is a cropper? Because, I don't know, it kind of sounds like someone who cuts hair.
It does, but no. In the textile industry back then, the cropper was at the absolute top of the food chain. After the wool was woven into cloth, the surface was kind of rough and fuzzy.
Right.
The cropper's job was to take these massive 50-pound iron shears, I mean huge things, and trim that fuzz off the wool to make it perfectly smooth.
So this was not a job you could just walk in off the street and do.
Oh, absolutely not. It took years of apprenticeship. You needed immense physical strength just to handle the shears all day, but you also needed the delicate touch of an artist so you didn't ruin the fabric.
So these men were the middle class of their day.
They were the aristocracy of labor. That's what historians call them. They commanded really high wages, and they had serious status in their villages. Everyone knew who the croppers were.
So when we talk about Luddites, we are talking about skilled, respected professionals.
Exactly. And the sources are very, very clear on this point. They didn't hate technology. They used complex tools every single day of their lives. They were completely comfortable with machinery.
If that machinery was used to help them.
That's the key. If it was used to enhance their work, fine. But that's not what was happening.
So why did they start smashing the wide frames? What was the specific issue?
It wasn't the machine itself. It was the economics surrounding the machine. You have to look at the context of the time. This is 1811. Britain has been at war with Napoleon for years.
The trade is all messed up.
Totally disrupted. There's a massive economic recession. On top of that, fashions are changing. People are starting to wear different clothes, lighter fabrics.
So the whole market for their product is shrinking. The pie is getting smaller.
The pie is definitely shrinking. And right at that moment, factory owners start bringing in these new shearing frames and wide frames that allow a few unskilled, low-paid workers to produce cheap, low-quality cloth really, really fast.
It's the classic quantity over quality shift.
Precisely. And for the croppers, this was an absolute catastrophe. They had a phrase for it. They called it falling from a high height.
That's powerful.
It is. You have to understand, losing your job when you're already at the bottom is terrible. But losing your job, your status, your whole identity, and your ability to provide a middle-class life for your family.
That's a different level of desperation.
It's explosive. It's much more volatile.
It brings up such an important psychological point. They weren't fighting the technology. They were fighting the fact that the technology was being used to cut them completely out of the deal.
Yes, they were perfectly happy for machines to be used if the profits were shared, or if the transition was managed in a way that helped them retrain. But the owners were using the machines to bypass their skills entirely and drive them into poverty.
So they tried to talk first, right? They didn't just go straight to the sledgehammers.
Oh, they tried everything. They sent petitions to Parliament. They appealed to the old trade guilds. They asked for minimum wage laws to be enforced.
And what happened?
They were ignored every single step of the way. Parliament was run by the factory owners and their friends. They had no interest in helping the workers.
And when you ignore a group of strong, organized, and very angry men who feel like they are being robbed of their future, you get
the army of redressers.
That is such a cool name. It really sounds like something out of a Marvel movie. The Army of Redressers.
It really does. It was formed around 1811. And I want to pause on that word redress for the students listening, because it's definitely not a word we use much in texting.
Good call. Yeah, what does it actually mean to redress something?
To redress means to set right an unfair situation, to correct a wrong. So by calling themselves the Army of Redressers, they were making a very clear statement.
They were saying, we aren't the criminals here.
Exactly. We are the ones fixing the crime. The crime is what the factory owners are doing to us and our families.
So they saw themselves as a kind of police force for their own industry.
Exactly. And like any good army, they created a legendary, almost mythical commander.
General Ned Ludd.
General Ludd, or sometimes King Ludd. He had a few different titles.
Now, let's be clear. Was there actually a guy named Ned Ludd leading these raids in 1811?
Almost certainly not. The name comes from a story, and it's likely an apocryphal one, about a young apprentice named Ned Ludd way back in 1779.
So decades earlier.
Right. And the story goes that he got scolded by his master for being lazy, and he just lost his temper. And he took a hammer and smashed 2 knitting frames to pieces in a fit of rage.
So he was the OG machine breaker.
He was the original, and decades later, the movement adopted his name as their symbol. But in 1811, General Ludd was a ghost. He was a myth.
I love the detail that the Luddites claimed he had his headquarters in Sherwood Forest.
Which is in Nottinghamshire, right where this all started.
The Robin Hood connection is impossible to miss.
And it was completely deliberate. They were painting themselves as the new Robin Hoods, fighting against the greedy sheriff of Nottingham, or, in this case, the greedy factory owners. They would send these threatening letters to the owners.
Signed by General Ludd.
Exactly. Imagine getting one of those. You're a factory owner, you open your mail, and it says, "Remove the frames from your factory within a fortnight, or we will visit you at night and do it for you. Signed, General Ludd's office, Sherwood Forest."
That's terrifying. It's psychological warfare.
It absolutely was. It gave the movement this scary, organized face, even if that face was totally imaginary.
But the violence itself was very, very real.
Extremely real. They didn't just break machines. They burned down entire mills. They exchanged gunfire with factory guards. In some cases, factory owners were assassinated. This wasn't just protest. This was an insurgency.
And the British government, they didn't take this lightly. They didn't say, oh, let's sit down and negotiate.
No. The reaction was overwhelming, brutal force. The government was terrified. You have to remember, the French Revolution wasn't that long ago in their memory.
Right, the aristocracy had seen what an angry mob could do.
They were scared to death that the working class would rise up and, chop their heads off with a guillotine.
So how hard did they crack down? What did they do?
First, they used the law as a weapon. They rushed a bill through Parliament called the Frame-Breaking Act. This made the destruction of machines a capital offense.
I want to make sure everyone listening heard that. A capital offense. That means punishable by the death penalty.
Yes. If you were caught smashing a wooden weaving frame, the government could hang you by the neck until you were dead.
That seems, incredibly disproportionate to us today. You're literally trading a human life for a piece of equipment.
It tells you everything you need to know about the values of the time. This is the era of classical liberalism, the belief that the free market, and especially private property rights, were sacred.
So an attack on property was an attack on civilization itself.
That's how they saw it. To the government, if you allow a mob to destroy property, you are destroying the very foundation of society. They valued the machine and the order far more than the people.
And it wasn't just laws, they brought in the military.
Oh, yeah. They flooded the north of England with soldiers. At one point, there were 12,000 troops deployed just to fight the Luddites.
12,000? That's a massive army for domestic police action.
To put that in perspective, at the same time, the Duke of Wellington was fighting Napoleon in Spain, and his entire army was only slightly bigger than that.
Wow.
The British government was using more troops to fight its own working class than it was to fight the French Empire. It was effectively a military occupation.
Did it work?
It did. The Luddites were hunted down, there were mass trials, many were executed, hanged in public in front of huge crowds to send a message.
And the others were transported.
Yes. For those who haven't covered this in history class yet, transportation sounds like you're getting a nice trip, but it was a nightmare.
It meant being chained up in the dark, filthy hold of a ship for months and sent to a penal colony in Australia.
You were stripped of your citizenship, shipped to the other side of the world to do hard labor, and you would almost certainly never see your family or your home again.
So by 1816 or so, the movement was crushed. The machines won.
The machines won. The army of redressers was broken.
Now, I know what a lot of you listening are probably thinking, okay, this is a tragic story, but it happened over 200 years ago. I'm worried about getting into university, not about weaving wool.
And that is a totally fair point. But here is the kicker. The Luddite experience is almost the exact same thing we are all going through right now with artificial intelligence.
Let's try to bridge that gap. We mentioned coding a little earlier.
Well, think about something even simpler, like Google Maps. 30 years ago, knowing how to navigate a big city was a real skill. Taxi drivers in London had to memorize 25,000 streets and 20,000 landmarks. It was called the knowledge.
It was a serious mental asset.
A huge asset. And now, I can navigate Tokyo just as well as a local because I have a little blue line on my phone telling me exactly where to walk.
Right. The mental effort has been completely outsourced to the machine.
Exactly. And for a long time, we thought automation would only come for the muscle jobs. Factory work, lifting heavy boxes on a production line. We all kind of thought, well, the smart jobs, the mind jobs, they're safe.
But AI is flipping that entire idea on its head.
Completely. The machines are now coming for the mind jobs. The sources we looked at list things like parsing legal precedents, preparing tax returns, writing code, or even making medical diagnoses.
And those are all jobs that require judgment. We used to think that human judgment was this unique, irreplaceable thing.
We were wrong. Just like the cropper thought his specialized skill with the shears was unique and irreplaceable, we are now finding out that algorithms can do a lot of our cognitive work faster and cheaper.
So the graphic designer who sees an AI-generated image winning an art competition
Is feeling the exact same gut punch anxiety that the weaver felt back in 1811. It's that fear of being depreciated, the fear of your hard-earned skill suddenly becoming worthless.
that really changes how you look at the Luddites. They weren't crazy. They weren't backwards. They were just the first people to realize that industrial capitalism doesn't really care about your dignity or your skill. It cares about efficiency and profit.
And they were fighting to mitigate the damage. That's a key word, to lessen the pain of that transition. And frankly, we are still fighting that same fight today, just with different machines.
So the Luddites tried to stop the change with force. They smashed the machines, and the government, in turn, smashed them back even harder.
Violence failed. The Luddites learned the very hard way that you cannot fight the British Army with sledgehammers.
But the anger didn't go away. The poverty didn't go away. The unfairness didn't go away. So what happened next?
Well, the working class realized they needed a brand new strategy. If they couldn't beat the system with physical force, they had to try to take over the system from the inside. They needed political power.
And this is what leads us directly to our second group, the Chartists.
This is the big pivot. We go from the smashing of machines in the 1810s to the signing of petitions in the 1830s and 40s. Chartism was the first mass working-class political movement in the history of the world.
So where does the name come from? Chartist?
It comes from a document they published in 1838 called the People's Charter.
And that name Charter, that was very clever branding on their part.
Oh, it was brilliant. They were deliberately linking themselves to the Magna Carta of 1215.
Which every history student knows is the great document that limited the king's power and established the idea of rights for Englishmen.
Exactly. So they were saying, we aren't dangerous rebels. We are true Englishmen, and we are just claiming our ancient rights and liberties. Their goal was to change who ran the country.
And to do that, they had 6 very specific, very clear demands. The 6 points of the People's Charter.
These 6 points are basically the DNA of the entire movement.
Let's run through them because they're going to sound completely normal to us, but back then they were absolutely revolutionary. So point number 1, universal suffrage.
A vote for every man over the age of 21. Now, we do have to note here, it didn't include women yet. That was a fight for a later generation. It was universal male suffrage.
But at the time, only a tiny fraction of wealthy, property-owning men could vote. So this was demanding that the poor have the exact same political voice as the rich.
A radical idea.
Hugely. Okay, point number 2, the ballot. Specifically, a secret ballot.
This is so crucial. In the 1830s, voting was often done in public. You'd have to stand on a platform in the middle of town and literally shout out who you were voting for.
So if your landlord was standing right there, or your factory boss,
You voted for who they told you to vote for. If you didn't, you'd be evicted from your home or fired from your job the very next day. The secret ballot was the only way to protect voters from that kind of bribery and intimidation.
point number 3, no property qualification to be an MP.
Right. To even run for parliament, you had to own a massive amount of land. This basically guaranteed that only the super-rich aristocracy could be in government.
So the Chartists said no. A man's intelligence and his right to lead shouldn't be measured by the number of acres he owns.
Which leads perfectly to point number 4, payment of members.
Yeah, these two are connected.
They absolutely are. So if you get rid of the property rule, a poor man can, in theory, run for office. But if the job of being a member of parliament doesn't pay a salary, a poor man can't afford to actually do it.
He has to work to feed his kids.
Of course. So they demanded that MPs get paid a salary from the state so that regular working people could actually afford to serve in government.
It's about democratizing the job of governing itself.
That's it. Okay, point number 5. Equal constituencies.
The voting map was a complete mess.
A total mess. You had these things called rotten boroughs, these tiny ancient villages with maybe 7 voters that still got to elect 2 members of parliament.
And at the same time, you had huge new industrial cities like Manchester with hundreds of thousands of people.
That had 0 representation, no MPs at all. The Chartists wanted the map redrawn so that every vote across the country would count equally.
And finally, point number 6. This was probably the most radical one. Annual parliaments.
Yeah, this was the big one. They wanted a general election every single year.
Wow. That sounds exhausting. Why on earth would they want that?
Their logic was that it would stop bribery and corruption. They figured if a politician has to face the voters every 12 months, they can't get too comfortable or stray too far from what the people want. It was about keeping politicians on a very, very short leash.
So when you look at these 6 points together,
Mm.
they weren't asking for handouts. They weren't asking for the government to give them free bread.
No. They were asking for the power to make the laws themselves. Their posters had slogans like slaves of capital and political serfs. They believed that if working people could elect their own representatives to parliament, then those representatives would pass laws that ensured a fair day's wages for a fair day's work.
So political power was the key to economic survival.
Precisely. That was the core belief.
So how did they fight for this? The Luddites used hammers. What were the weapons of the Chartists?
Their main weapon was the crowd. Their official motto was peace and order. They wanted to show the government that they were respectable, they were disciplined, and most importantly, that they were too numerous to be ignored.
And when you say numerous, just how big are we talking here?
They're talking massive. By 1842, the Chartists Association had 400 branches all across the country, 50,000 active paying members, and they had their own newspaper, the Northern Star.
Which was hugely popular.
Incredibly, it was selling 36,000 copies a week, which at the time made it one of the biggest papers in the country.
And there's a really touching detail from the historical accounts about how that newspaper was actually used.
Yes. Because literacy wasn't universal yet, many working people couldn't read. So in pubs and coffee houses and workshops, one person who could read would stand up on a table and read the Northern Star aloud to everyone else.
So it created this shared culture.
It did. Even if you couldn't read the words yourself, you knew the arguments, you knew the latest news, you felt like you were part of this huge national movement.
And their main tactic, their big show of force, was the monster petition.
They literally physically collected signatures on these enormous petitions. We're talking about scrawls of paper that were miles long.
And they tried this 3 times, in 1839, 1842, and 1848.
The first time, in 1839, they rolled a petition with 1.2 million signatures into Parliament. It was so big they had to carry it in on a huge cart.
And what did Parliament say?
They said no. They overwhelmingly voted to not even hear it, just rejected it out of hand.
So the Chartists went back, they organized even harder, and in 1842 they came back with a new petition. This time, with 3.3 million signatures.
I mean, that's a huge chunk of the adult population of Britain at the time.
And Parliament's response?
They basically laughed it out of the room again.
It must have been just infuriating for them.
It was deeply demoralizing. And by the third attempt, in 1848, they claimed to have roughly 6 million signatures. Now, we have to be fair, historians admit, and the opponents at the time noticed, some of these were fake.
Right.
You know, people had signed joke names like Queen Victoria or the Duke of Wellington or Mr. Punch.
But even with the fake names, the scale of it was just undeniable. Imagine the visual of carrying these giant bales of paper signed by millions of your fellow citizens into the House of Commons.
It was a physical manifestation of the will of the people, but Parliament just did not care.
Now, you said their motto was peace and order. But when you get ignored and mocked 3 times,
Yeah.
well, peace gets a lot harder to maintain.
It really does. And the Chartists had some very creative ways of being disruptive while staying sort of on the right side of the law. One of my favorites is the church occupations.
Oh, this is brilliant. Tell the students about this.
Okay, so on a Sunday morning, hundreds of Chartists would show up early to the main parish church in a town. But they wouldn't sit in the back pews reserved for the poor.
No, they would crowd into the private rented pews right at the front, the ones owned by the rich families.
Imagine the local factory owner walking in with his wife and kids, all dressed up in their Sunday best, and finding his personal, paid-for seat occupied by 50 dirty, tired-looking workers who are just staring back at him.
The nerve of it.
And then they would demand that the vicar preach a sermon on a Chartist-approved text, something from the Bible about do not oppress the poor or let justice roll down like waters. It was brilliant civil disobedience.
But it did also get more violent.
It did. There was a general strike in 1842. About 500,000 workers across the north of England just stopped working. They went from factory to factory and pulled the plugs out of the steam boilers to shut the whole system down.
And then there was the real tragedy, the one at Newport.
The Newport Rising in 1839. This is where peace and order really broke down and died. In Newport, Wales, Some local Chartist leaders had been arrested and were being held in a hotel.
Okay.
A massive crowd of their supporters, thousands of them, marched on the Westgate Hotel to demand their release.
But the authorities were waiting for them.
They were. Soldiers were hiding inside the hotel. And as the crowd approached, the soldiers opened fire, straight into the unarmed protesters.
It was a massacre.
A complete massacre. 24 people were killed on the spot. Another 40 were badly wounded.
So, just like with the Luddites, when push came to shove, the government was willing to shoot its own citizens to maintain control.
Absolutely. And after 1848, after the third petition failed, and with leaders being arrested or transported to Australia, the movement just sort of fizzled out. By the 1850s, most people called Chartism a spent force, a noble but ultimately a total failure.
So let's look at the scorecard for a minute. The Luddites, crushed and executed. The Chartists, ignored, shot at, and dismantled.
It really looks like a total and complete defeat for the working class.
Like, yes, there's always a but in history, isn't there?
So there is, but history is a very long game. If you zoom out from the 1850s and look at the scorecard again in, say, 1918, about 70 years after that last failed petition, something absolutely incredible has happened.
Let's go through the 6 points of the charter one more time.
Okay, point 1, universal suffrage.
Done. By then, pretty much all men had the vote.
The secret ballot.
Done. That was standard practice everywhere.
No property qualification for MPs.
Gone. Abolished. Anyone can run for office.
Payment of members.
Yep. By 1911, MPs were getting paid a salary.
Equal constituencies.
The map had been redrawn multiple times to make it much more fair.
So that's 5 out of the 6 demands.
Wow. 5 out of 6.
Exactly. The only one that never happened was annual parliaments.
Which, let's be honest, is probably for the best. I don't think anybody wants to go through a general election every single year.
I would agree with that. But just think about the magnitude of that victory. The Chartists were mocked. They were called a dangerous mob. They were thrown in prison. They died for these ideas.
They lost completely in their own lifetime.
And yet they won the future. We are living in the democratic world that they designed.
That is such a powerful and, frankly, an inspiring legacy.
It really is. Chartism was a training ground. The hundreds of thousands of people who organized those petitions and meetings, they didn't just disappear. They learned how to give speeches. They learned how to run committees and manage funds.
They went on to found the trade unions.
And eventually, the socialist groups and the British Labour Party, they taught the working class that they had power, that they could organize on a massive national scale.
So even though they lost the specific battle for the charter in the 1840s, they built the army that eventually won the entire war.
That's the perfect way to put it.
This has been a heavy deep dive, but a really necessary one. Before we let you go, let's just do a quick recap to make sure we have the big picture locked in.
Sure. So part 1, the Luddites, kicking off around 1811. These were skilled professionals, the propers, who smashed machines not because they were stupid or anti-tech, but because they were desperate. They were fighting to mitigate the economic damage of automation.
And the government responded with overwhelming force, including the death penalty, because they were prioritizing the protection of private property.
Exactly. Then part 2. The Chartists in the 1830s and 40s, this was the big shift to politics. They realized smashing machines didn't work, so they tried to change the law. They had their 6 points, the vote, the secret ballot, paid MPs, and so on.
And they used tactics like mass petitions and peaceful but disruptive protests.
And that leads to part 3, the legacy. The Chartists failed completely in the short term. The Newport Rising was a disaster, all their petitions were ignored. But in the long term, they were spectacularly successful. They secured almost all of our modern democratic rights.
Okay, to wrap this all up, we're going to do a quick check your understanding. I'm going to throw out 3 questions. I want you to just pause or take a second in your head and see if you can answer them.
Let's see what you retained.
Question 1. The term Luddite is often used to mean someone who hates technology. Based on our discussion, why is this definition historically inaccurate?
The answer. The Luddites were skilled artisans who used complex tools every day. They didn't hate the technology itself. They hated that it was being used to bypass their skills, cut their wages, and destroy their entire trade. It was an economic protest, not a technological one.
Question 2. The Chartists had 6 demands in their People's Charter. 5 of them eventually became law in Britain. Which one was the only demand that was never adopted by the government?
That would be annual parliaments. The idea of holding a general election every single year was the only point that never stuck.
Okay, last one. Question 3. If you compare the government's response to both the Luddites and the Chartists, What fundamental principle was the British government prioritizing over the welfare of its workers?
They were prioritizing property rights and stability. Whether it was hanging Luddites for breaking frames or shooting Chartists at Newport, the government consistently chose to protect the rights of property owners and the order of the economy over the lives and demands of the working class.
And we want to leave you with one final thought to chew on.
The Chartists were seen as the crazies of their day. Respectable, educated people genuinely thought that giving the vote to a factory worker would be the end of civilization as they knew it.
And yet today, their crazy demands are the basic, boring bedrock of our democracy. We take them completely for granted.
So look around you today. Who are the people being called unrealistic? Who are the groups being ignored or mocked right now for demanding what seems like radical change?
And ask yourself this. In 100 years, will we all be living by their rules?
Thanks for diving in with us.
Keep thinking. See you next time.